Hello, everybody, and welcome. Now, thank you so much for joining us on this weekly walk. Now, first of all, I want to welcome you all back since, of course, we were actually out of the office last Wednesday, but it is great to see so many folks joining us here again this week. Now, today we're going to focus on the formal art and design of the park. So we're going to discuss some of the more obscure statues of Central Park. So the ones that many people pass by but don't necessarily give too much thought about. All right, so again, before we get started, as always, feel free to use the chat feature on your Zoom control bar and say hello and comment. You can also use the Q&A feature to ask any questions. Now, joining us on the back end today is Ryan. He's going to go ahead and answer any inquiries that you folks might have. And if you need the closed captioning enabled, you can turn them on by pressing the live transcript button. And today on our walk, we're going to be using historic images from a few different sources, including the New York Public Library, the New York Historical Society, the Museum of the City of New York, and the Library of Congress. And of course, our official mission here at the Conservancy is to preserve and celebrate Central Park as a sanctuary from the pace and pressures of city life, enhancing the enjoyment and well-being of all. And we've been taking care of the park since 1980. All right, folks, so as I've mentioned, we are going to focus mostly on the obscure statues of Central Park. But what exactly does that mean, especially for such a busy and recognizable park like ours? Now, as a disclaimer, it should be said that almost all these statues that we're going to take a look at on the walk today aren't exactly that obscure at all. So we actually have more than 70 plus statues, monuments, memorials, whatever else that have been added to the park landscape since the very beginning. And most, if not all of them, are going to be masterpieces in their own right, which I think speaks of the iconic nature of the entire park landscape itself. So I think a more accurate description for or title for our walk today is the lesser known statues of Central Park. So here in the image, you can see the back of one of the most famous statues here in the park. That is the Angel of the Waters at Bethesda Terrace, the only one that was actually ever commissioned by Vaux and Olmsted themselves. All right, folks, let's go ahead and take a look at our map. So we're going to start off our walk along the west side at 72nd Street, and then we're going to make our way east through the heart of the park. And along the way, we're going to check out busts, statues, and other memorials to less famous individuals like Victoria Havlick or perhaps Victor Herbert. And then we'll end things off over at the east side at 5th Avenue and 67th Street. All right, so let's actually begin right here at 72nd Street, also known as Women's Gate. So this is actually a very popular entrance into the park since it's just right off of the 8th Avenue subway line. So usually on a good day, you'll see lots of folks here, including both tourists and locals alike. So note all the cyclists and pedicabs in this area. All right, so we're going to make our way south. We're going to first pass by this wooden pergola with all the wisteria plantings on it. Now, here at this entrance, there's actually two of these rustic wooden structures welcoming visitors from the Upper West Side. So one on the north, and the one that we're looking at here is, of course, the one just off towards the south. And as we make our way down the pathway, we come to this very large sycamore tree just right around the corner. Sycamores are, of course, pretty common here in Central Park. You can see them pretty much in any landscape since they provide quite a lot of shade with their massive leaves and tall height. One thing that you'll notice as we walk around today is that a lot of the leaves are actually still intact on many of the trees in the park. We're actually still in transition between these seasons, but this change, of course, happens really quickly. So give it a few more weeks, perhaps maybe even a few more days, and all the leaves that we're looking at in the images, they're pretty much going to be all gone by then. All right. So let's take let's go ahead and continue right on up the pathway, and up ahead on the right, you can see our very first statue of the day. So let's take a closer look at it right now. So the statue is officially called the 7th Regiment Memorial, and it honors the 58 casualties of the 7th Regiment of the New York Militia during the Civil War in the 1860s. Now, the 7th Regiment was among the first to muster into combat during the war, and actually saw action in Baltimore as well as right here in New York City during what was called the draft riots of 1863. The 7th Regiment also had the nickname of the Silk Stocking Regiment because many of its volunteers actually hailed from right here in New York City, and many of them came from some of the wealthiest families in town. The regiment actually had its headquarters near Central Park along Park Avenue and 67th Street. So it's actually still around today, and the building is one of the many great landmarks of the Upper East Side that you can still very much visit into the 21st century. And if we take a closer look over at the pedestal, you can see the name of the statue's artist. The statue was dedicated in 1874, and it was going to be crafted by John Quincy Adams Ward, who was known widely as the Dean of American Sculptors. The pedestal that we're looking at right here, this was done by Richard Morris Hunt, so another very famous architect in New York City. So basically, both of these names are the two leading figures in the city's art and architectural world at that time. So the 7th Regiment Memorial definitely is definitely not an obscure statue by any means. So let's go ahead and walk right across towards the other side of the drive now and check out some other statues in the area. And along the north side of the drive, we can find this very large statue of this man. So this is actually Daniel Webster. Daniel Webster was a leading political figure in 19th century America. So he served as a U.S. Senator from the state of Massachusetts, as well as Secretary of State for at least 3 different presidential administrations. Now, this very much larger than life depiction was actually first created by the artist Thomas Ball, who greatly admired Webster for much of his career, and was then unveiled in 1876. The statue greets visitors passing through the west side of the park, as it sits on a very, very prominent position right by the main drive. Now, here's a statue from nearly the same exact spot, but with a difference of about 120 years. To me, the most striking thing about this image is actually the change in the landscape. Now, I'm not sure if it's just like the angle of the shot itself or what, but it definitely looks like a completely different background, almost as if it was a lot more spacious. I know also the vines on the statue in the older photograph, and of course, the horse carriages riding around in the park today. All right, so we're going to go ahead and move on. And right up ahead, perched on top of this rocky outcrop, we can see a very animated looking statue that's very prominent since it actually overlooks the drive itself. So let's go ahead and take a much closer look. So this one is called the Falcon, and it was sculpted in bronze by an artist named George Simons, who himself was actually a pretty avid falconer. The base is actually made of granite from Barry, Vermont, and it was then unveiled in the park in 1875. And I think it's a nice little added touch considering all the red-tailed hawks and other birds of prey that populate the skies over Central Park. Again, we're actually not too far away from Sheep Meadow, and if you've ever been to Sheep Meadow, then you might have at least seen some of the birds of prey just kind of hovering around that area. It really is kind of fascinating. All right, folks, let's go ahead and keep moving. And from here, we're going to walk right down our favorite promenade, the mall. So let's go ahead and check out some of the statues in that area. Now, as we walk right through the landscape, we come across this view of the skyline, just basically kind of creeping through the background of, while some folks and their dogs are basically enjoying the cloudy day out on the lawn. At this point now, just beyond the path, we come to a paved open area that's known to many here in the park as Dead Road. Now, this area is just located just west of the mall, and in the warmer months, you might find all sorts of dance skaters here. Lots of statues in this vicinity since we're right by the concert ground. Now, here we have one of the rawest depictions, I think, of nature that you'll find in any artwork in Central Park. This is called Eagles and Prey, and it was created by the French artist Christophe Breton. It was first cast in Paris in 1850, and I think it's a wonderful example of what's called the Animalier movement that took hold of 19th century France. As you can see, it basically depicts these two eagles attacking this poor, hapless goat. The fact that the statue is just a 30-second walk away from the falconer is, I think, no accident. And both of these statues are great examples of the synthesis of art and nature right here in Central Park. And as you all can see, the statue was donated by a gentleman named Gordon Burnham back in 1863. since it was actually first cast 13 years prior in 1850, that would make Eagles and Prey older than Central Park itself. And it's also going to be older than pretty much any other statue, memorial, whatever else located in any New York City park. Maybe perhaps with the exception of the obelisk over at the upper end of the park. All right. And nearby, we can find the bust of the German playwright and philosopher Friedrich Schiller. Friedrich Schiller was donated by members of New York's German community way back in 1859. So it's also a pretty old statue dating back to the very early years of the park's construction. Originally, Schiller sat in the Ramble for close to a century before it was moved here to the mall back in 1955. So here's Schiller over at his old location in the early 1900s. If you're familiar at all with the Ramble, this was actually located over at the, or just north of the, or located on a rocky outcrop just north of the Cascade, basically overlooking the lake along the west side. And right nearby, we can find this other bust as well. This one is of Victor Herbert. Victor Herbert was a band leader and early founder of ASCAP, the American Society of Composers, Authors, and Publishers, but you might best know them as the organization that oversees musicians' royalties. This, of course, makes perfect sense when you consider its location right by the concert ground, where Victor Herbert actually often played with his band right during the turn of the 20th century. All right, folks, we're quickly moving along now. And from the concert ground, I want to take us down the mall. Now, as someone who works in the park and often strolls down the mall when I can, I always consider myself lucky that I get such an incredible, iconic view here. Note the last few leaves still clinging onto the branches. These images were actually taken from roughly about several days ago, but a lot has changed since then. Reminders of the approaching wintertime can be seen literally everywhere you go in the park. The mall and all of its gorgeous American elm trees, I think they really stand out the most when you can see the bare, winding branches up in the sky. Of course, that happens during the winter time. All right, so now we come to one of my favorite statues right here in the mall. So this gentleman that's posed seated right in front of us, this is the writer Fitz Green Halleck. Today, Fitz Green Halleck, he's a relatively unknown figure. In fact, most folks, I'm pretty sure, would be very hard pressed to name any one of his poems, let alone know who this guy actually even is. But Halleck was actually a very popular writer in his time. So he had fans in high places, including President Abraham Lincoln. And he even worked as the personal secretary of John Jacob Astor. Now, after he died, some of his friends paid for his statue to be placed right here in the mall. And it was dedicated in 1877 to a crowd of roughly 10,000 people, including President Rutherford B. Hayes, right over here on the left-hand side. So yeah, he really was a beloved figure in his time. Just the fact that, so many people came in 1877 to pay their last respects to this man, I think is fantastic. By the way, even though he has been long forgotten by most audiences now in the 20th and then 21st centuries, Halleck has been making somewhat of a comeback within the last few years among scholars and writers who've been closely examining the LGBT nature of some of his work. So there is a growing appreciation for him, at least now in the 21st century. All right, so let's go ahead and continue away from the mall now, and I'm going to head east towards Fifth Avenue. But first, we're going to need to cross Willowdale Arch, one of the original box design crossings of Central Park. One of the more curious aspects, I think, of this bridge is this sandstone carving located along the inside wall. So this is going to be the last remains of a drinking fountain that was actually once used by many early park goers. So right at the bottom, you can actually see this basin, or at least the remains of this basin, where you can grab a ladle full of water. Of course, the fountain is long gone, but it does give you a peek into some of the lost architectural elements of Central Park. Now, here's an image I wanted to show you folks before we continue. So this is the arch from roughly 1862, right when it was first constructed. And standing above it are going to be 6 of the park's founding commissioners and founders and designers, rather, including Vox and Olmsted. Vox is the gentleman right here at the center, and Frederick Law Olmsted is the guy standing all the way over here on the right. All right, we're going to go ahead and start making our way towards the last stop on our tour, but I wanted to pause for a moment right now and conduct our poll of the day. So let's go ahead and launch the poll right now. All right, folks. So since we've been taking a look at a few of the statues around the park today, I wanted to ask, do you have a favorite statue in Central Park? So we've examined just a few of the many dozens of memorials, monuments, and other sculpted works of art so far, but of course there are many, many others that we haven't mentioned at all. So go ahead and vote on your favorite, or if your favorite isn't on there, let us know in the chat section. My personal favorite, really out of any of these, is probably going to be Angel of the Waters, and it kind of looks like it kind of skewing towards that particular direction as well. All right, let me give it a few more seconds, and then we can go ahead and share the results with you all right now. All right, so it kind of looks like, let's go ahead and end off the poll. All right, so it looks like roughly close to 32% of you also said Angel of the Waters, a good choice. Followed closely by Alice in Wonderland, and then Balto, and then at number 4 is the Women's Rights Pioneers Monument, which I think is quite fascinating. The top 4 that we have in here right now, the Angel of the Waters, Women's Rights Pioneers Monument, Balto, and Alice in Wonderland, these truly are some of the most famous statues in the park, which is of course one reason why we're not really going to talk about these statues as much today. All right, let's go ahead and continue on with the walk. So let us now move on towards the next stop. All right, since we are on the topic of obscure statues, we have, of course, been skipping a few of the major ones, including Angel of the Waters, as well as this one right here on the right. This is going to be Balto. And just to illustrate how popular Balto is, let me tell you, folks, that when it really took a while before I could actually get even a good clear shot of Balto without so many other folks in the background taking their own photographs. So we're going to go ahead and save Balto for a later weekly walk. So don't forget to check or tune back in next week. Ryan is going to be presenting on Balto's Big Adventure. So all very, very excited for that. All right, folks, let's go ahead and make our way towards our last stop. And we're going to need to exit out of the park walls and step out onto 5th Avenue. Now, just north of 67th Street along the perimeter walls, you're going to find the statue of the 107th Infantry Memorial. Now, the 107th Infantry Memorial was dedicated in 1927 to honor soldiers who died during World War I. Again, like so many of today's statues on our walk, this memorial isn't necessarily obscure. It faces a heavily trafficked section of 5th Avenue, so lots of people pass by it every single day. And every once in a while, you will see wreaths and flowers and things like that. But it is one that, compared to other war memorials nearby, such as the very opulent and heroic cold-covered statues of Grand Army Plaza, or perhaps maybe the USS Maine Monument over at Columbus Circle, this one is a little bit more subdued. It's a bit more realistic in terms of it's a bit more realistic of a portrait of the horrors of war. So just look at these soldiers' faces and their poses. You can really see the fear, the chaos, and the confusion going around amongst these young men. It was actually sculpted by the artist Carl Ilava, who himself had served as a soldier with the 107th. So he really was intimately familiar with the realities of combat. All right, folks, we're going to go ahead and end things off right here in front of this statue. Very fitting, I think, since we started off our walk on the west side, examining the 7th Regiment Memorial. So I want to thank you all so much for joining us on this weekly walk. Now, don't forget as well to check out some of our other walks. Next week, we are going to be doing the Bridging the Seasons virtual tour. So we'll talk about some of the many different bridges and arches in the lower end of the park. Ryan is going to go ahead and place the link for that in the chat section. But again, it's going to be for Friday, December 16th at 2 p.m. And of course, thank you all so much for joining us on this weekly walk. Please follow us on all of our social media channels, including Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube. You can follow us using the handle Central Park NYC. Now, we're going to go ahead and leave the room open for any last final questions. But from all of us here at the Central Park Conservancy, thank you so much for joining us, folks. Have a good day.